Imagine looking into a mirror and the reflection staring back at you doesn't just share your face, your hair, or your DNA, but it also shares a deep and burning hatred for you. Now imagine that same reflection plotting to steal your life. On November 6, 1966, the police in Irvine, California received a frantic, whispered 911 call from a young woman hidden inside her bedroom closet. Outside her door were two armed men who were bounding her roommate, preparing to make a makeshift execution chamber in the bathroom. But the most terrifying part of this home invasion wasn't just the hitman, it was the mastermind waiting outside in the getaway car. A mastermind who possessed the exact same fingerprints and the exact same face and the exact same smile as the victim inside the house. Today we are talking about the story of Sunny and Jeena Han. To the world, they were the perfect Korean-born identical twins, co-valedictorians, inseparable and destined for greatness. But beneath the surface of their identical smiles laid a toxic cocktail of gambling addictions, identity theft, and a sibling rivalry so vicious that it ended in a contract killing. This is the case of California's infamous evil twin. Let's dive right in. Sunny and Jeena Han were born in South Korea in 1974. From the moment they could walk, they were a unit. In a traditional Korean culture that deeply valued academic excellence, respect for elders, and family honor, the Han twins were the ultimate source of pride for them. They did almost everything together. They dressed alike, spoke in unison, and shared the same dreams as well. To their extended family, they were a double blessing, holding the promise of a glorious future together. Later on, when the family emigrated to the United States, settling in the sunny and affluent suburbs of Orange County, California, the pressure to succeed never lessened. It actually intensified tenfold. As immigrants, the twins carried out the heavy weight of their parents' sacrifices, expected to validate the family's new life in America. The sisters also adjusted remarkably well on the surface. At the high school, they weren't just popular, they were an unstoppable pair of academic juggernauts. They dominated the honor roll, aced their advanced placement exams, and ran circles around their peers. Now, by the time graduation had rolled around in 1992, the school administration faced a unique, unprecedented dilemma. When the final grade point averages were calculated, the twins were tied down to the absolute decimal point, as there was no fair way to choose one over the other without causing a family feud or an administrative nightmare. Ultimately, they were named co-valedictorians of their graduating class, standing side by side on the stage. Now, local newspapers ran feature stories on them. They were hailed as the definition of the American dream. Brilliant, beautiful immigrant success stories. Everyone assumed that they would go to the same university, dominate the corporate world, and remain best of friends forever because they were a brand, a collective unit of success together. But behind those matching valedictorian sashes, a dark dynamic was brewing. According to family friends and later court documents, the pressure to maintain perfection was suffocating. Even worse so, the twins were constantly compared to one another by their family, teachers, and community. Who was prettier, who was slightly smarter, who was the good twin and who was the bad twin. This constant psychological measurement began to wear on their relationship. An unhealthy undercurrent of resentment had begun to form, a silent competition where one sister's success felt like the other sister's failure. So when they graduated high school together, the physical tether that kept them together had finally snapped. Sunny went off to the University of San Diego, while Gina chose the University of California, Irvine. Now, for the first time in their lives, they were actually individuals. They had separate bedrooms, separate friends, and even separate identities. And that's when the cracks began to show. Because without the rigid structure of high school and the constant surveillance of their family, Both sisters had begun to drift into adulthood. But while Sunny managed to keep her life relatively stable and focused on her career and goals, Gina's life began to spiral into a dark world of chaos, debt, and desperation. So it started with the casinos because Southern California is just a short drive or a flight away from Las Vegas and the local tribal casinos. For Jeena Han, the thrill of the gambling tables became an instant all-consuming addiction. The rush of winning was intoxicating, making her feel powerful, independent, and separated from her twin. But the despair of losing was also catastrophic. Soon Gina's student loans were completely gone. Her savings were wiped out. Her grades began to tank as she skipped classes to spend nights at the blackjack tables, chasing her losses. But as an addict always needs the next bet, always believing the next hand will fix everything for her. So Gina began borrowing money from her friends, her family, and from anyone who would trust her. She lied about why she needed the cash, spinning tables of textbooks costs, medical bills, and also emergency expenses. And so when those bridges burned and her inner circles realized that she was gambling it all away, they completely cut her off. Gina turned into a darker and more dangerous method to fund her habit, and that was through crime. So Gina eventually began forging checks. She opened fraudulent credit lines using fake names. She was living on a knife's edge basically, constantly running away from creditors, bad checks, and the law. She was drowning herself in debt and the walls were closing in fast. And so who did she look at when she needed a lifeline? Her identical mirror image, which was Sunny Han. Now Sunny, on the other hand, had maintained a relatively normal life because she wasn't completely immune to family drama. However, compared to Gina, she was the golden child, the stable one. In fact, Gina had begun to deeply resent this. She felt like a narcissistic sense of entitlement to Sunny's life, Sunny's money, and Sunny's clean record. In Gina's mind, they were identical, so what belonged to Sunny should rightfully belong to her as well. In early 1996, the tension had boiled over as Gina moved into Sunny's apartment in San Diego under the guise of getting her life back together and seeking sisterly support. Sunny, wanting to help her twin, welcomed her in with open arms. It was in fact the decision she would regret for the rest of her life, because instead of reforming, Gina used this opportunity to pillage her sister's life from the inside out. Eventually, Gina stole Sunny's driver license, her credit cards, and her checkbook because they look exactly alike. Gina could walk away into a bank, present Sunny's ID, sign Sunny's signature, and withdraw the cash without anyone noticing. She also went through a massive shopping spree, running in thousands of dollars in debt in Sunny's name and leaving a trail of financial destruction. But the ultimate betrayal here came when Gina took the keys to Sunny's car and drove off, leaving her sister stranded, financially ruined, and legally liable for Gina's actions. In the end, when Sunny discovered what her own flesh and blood had done to her, she was heartbroken. But she was also furious because she had spent years covering for Gina, bailing her out, and enduring her chaotic lifestyle. This was the final straw. Identity theft is a felony, and Sunny decided that the only way to stop her sister was to hold her accountable before Gina dragged them both into complete ruin. And so Gina made her way to the police. She filed an official report against her identical twin. Later on, in May 1996, police had tracked Gina down because she was driving Sunny's stolen car and carrying her stolen IDs. The arrest was quite swift actually. Gina was charged with grand theft and fraud as well. And so as she sat in a cold jail cell staring at the concrete walls, Gina didn't feel remorse at all. She didn't think about how she had ruined her sister's life or betrayed her trust even. Instead, a deeply twisted, malignant anger began to fester inside of her. She had blamed Sunny for everything. Sunny had humiliated her. Sunny had put her in jail. Now, if you're wondering how far this hatred would go, stay tuned because what Gina did next shocks even the seasoned homicide detectives. Because the sisterly bond wasn't just broken from here, it was completely erased, replaced by a plan for murder. Now, Gina was eventually released on bail, but her legal troubles were far from over. She was facing serious prison time, her reputation was ruined, and her family was deeply ashamed of her. And now she also felt completely cornered like a caged animal. And in her rapt and desperate mind, there was only one solution to all of her problems. If Sunny was dead, the primary witness against her would be gone, and the criminal charges might fall apart. But from here, Gina's plan went even deeper and darker. If Sunny was dead, Gina could step into her sister's shoes permanently. With their identical faces and matching fingerprints, Gina could completely steal Sunny's clean identity, take over her bank accounts, and start over as Sunny Han. The bad twin would vanish into the grave, and the good twin would live life out as an imposter. But Gina also knew that she couldn't pull off this murder alone. She didn't have the physical strength, and she needed an alibi for this. And so Gina began scouting for accomplices in the local area, looking for people she could control. And so eventually she connected with two teenagers, a 16-year-old Archie and 15-year-old John. Now these two teenagers were young, impressionable kids from troubled backgrounds, easily swayed by older, attractive college-age women who promised to give them quick cash and easy rewards. Gina later on told them a completely fabricated story to them on board. She claimed that Sunny was a bad person who was holding her personal belongings, her electronics, and her hard-earned money hostage in her apartment in Irvine, California, where Sunny had recently moved to escape Gina. Gina in fact offered the boys a major cut out of the cash if they help her retrieve her stuff by force. And so Gina made up a list of items she needed for this act. But the grocery list of items Gina had purchased and gathered in the days leading up to November 6, 1996, told a much more different, far more sinister story, because they weren't actually tools for moving furniture. Now let's think logically about this situation, ladies and gentlemen, because you don't actually need large garbage bags, heavy duct tape, and a loaded handgun to reclaim a few sweaters and a television. This was actually the kit of an execution squad. This was actually a premeditated murder. The plan was highly orchestrated. Gina would drive the getaway car, a rented vehicle, and park it down the street from Sunny's apartment complex in Irvine, to avoid being seen on cameras or by the neighbors. Archie and John would pose as salesmen to gain entry into the apartment, and once inside, they were to overpower Sunny and her roommate, bind them and hold them secure until Gina arrived to finish the job and clean up the scene. And so on the morning of November 6, Gina, Archie and John piled into the rented car and drove towards Irvine. The weather was clear, the neighborhood was quite peaceful, and Sunny Han had no idea that her own face was driving towards her with a trunk full of murder weapons. On that very day, inside the Irvine apartment, Sunny Han was getting ready for her day, completely unaware of the storm gathering outside. Her roommate Helen Kim was also home on that day, hanging out by her living room. It was a completely ordinary quiet morning until 11:30 a.m. when there was a sharp knock at the front door. Helen went to answer it. Standing on the threshold were two young men, Archie and John. At first, they looked young, holding clipboards, claiming that they were selling magazine subscriptions to raise money for a school. Helen, being polite, started to talk to them, but within a few seconds, the vibe completely shifted. The boys' faces went completely cold and they pushed forward. Now, before Helen could react in this chaos or slam the door, the boys forced their way into the apartment, throwing their weight against the door, and Archie pulled out a fully loaded .38 caliber handgun from his jacket, pressing it completely into Helen's face. They shoved her to the ground, screaming at her to keep her quiet or they would blow her head off. Helen was completely paralyzed with fear, staring up at the barrel of the gun. Now down the hallway in her bedroom, Sunny heard the commotion. She heard the heavy thud on the door, the unfamiliar male voices shouting, and the terrifying sounds of Helen crying out of fear. Now Sunny's instincts had kicked in instantly. She knew this wasn't a random robbery. Deep down, she had a sickening feeling about who was truly behind this attack. Amidst all of this, Sunny quietly grabbed her cordless phone, slipped into her closet among the hanging clothes, and frantically dialed 911. In a trembling, breathless whisper, Sunny told the dispatcher,
Please help me. Someone has broken into my apartment. They have a gun. I think they are going to kill us. Send help fast.
After hearing this, the dispatcher told Sunny to stay on the line, trying to gather more information, but time was running out. Out in the living room, Archie and John had successfully bound Helen Kim with plastic zip ties and wrapped duct tape tightly around her mouth to silence her. They also dragged her into the bathroom and threw her into the bathtub, which is a classic chilling tactic used by contract killers to contain the blood and mess of an upcoming execution. After this, they turned their attention to the rest of the apartment. They walked down the hallway, checking room by room. They reached the end of the hall. They kicked open Sunny's bedroom door with a loud crash. Now on the other side, the dispatcher frantically tried to call back, but the line went completely dead. Archie and John had searched the room and found Sunny hiding in the closet. They grabbed her, ripped her phone from her hand, and dragged her out of the bedroom. Sunny fought back with everything she had, screaming for help, biting their hands, and even scratching at their faces. But this time she was outnumbered and outmatched. They threw her to the ground, binding her wrists and ankles with the plastic zip ties and also taping her mouth shut to silence her screams. So they dragged Sunny into the bathroom, placing her right next to her terrified, crying roommate in the tub. The trap was sprung. The victims were also secured. All that was left was to call Gina, who was waiting down the street, to come in and execute the final phase of the plan. But at this time, Gina and her teenage hitman had made one fatal mistake. They didn't realize how fast the Irvine Police Department could move in when a 911 call suddenly goes silent. Just minutes after the 911 call cut out, patrol cars screeched to a halt outside the apartment complex. Officers jumped right in, guns drawn, moving tactically and silently towards Sunny's second floor unit. They knew that a weapon was involved in this scene and they were prepared for the worst. Now inside the apartment, Archie and John heard the distant sirens getting closer and closer to them, then suddenly stopping right outside. As panic set in, they realized that the police were already there and their window of escape was slamming shut. Abandoning the plan to call Gina, the two teens dashed out from the front door, trying to blend into the apartment courtyard and escape down the back stairs. However, they didn't make it that far when officers sealing the perimeter spotted them running, ordered them down, and tackled them to the concrete. Inside their pockets, police found extra duct tape, the loaded .38 handgun, and the keys to the rental car. Officers rushed into the apartment, clearing the rooms one by one until they found the bathroom. There, huddled in the bathtub, bound and terrified, but miraculously alive, were Sunny Han and Helen Kim. Officers cut their bindings, comforting the traumatized women, and as the detectives began securing the crime scene and questioning the suspects, they noticed a rental car parked just a block away, sitting idly with a single occupant. Sitting in the driver's seat, waiting patiently for the signal that her sister was dead so she could come over and claim her new life, was Jeena Han. Now, when officers approached the car with flashlights and ordered her out, she was cooperative but chillingly cold. They searched her purse. Inside, they found Sunny Han's real driver's license, also her credit cards and her personal papers. Gina was immediately arrested on the spot, and when the news broke the following morning, the media went into absolute frenzy. The headlines wrote themselves across the nation. The Evil Twin case. It was a sensational, stranger-than-fiction story that captivated the entire country because two beautiful, brilliant Korean twins, co-valedictorians who had shared everything, now completely torn apart by the dark murder for hire plot. And so the trial began in 1997 in Orange County, as it was legal battle for the ages. The prosecution laid out a devastating, methodical case. They presented the receipts for the gun, the zip ties, and the trash bag as well. They brought Archie and John to the stand, who turned to the state's evidence and testified that Gina had masterminded the entire operation, promising them money and guiding them to the apartment. The prosecutors later argued that Gina's motive was pure greed and malice. She wanted to eliminate her sister to escape fraud charges and steal her identity permanently. To this, Gina's defense team tried to paint a completely different picture. They argued that Gina was completely depressed, suicidal, and mentally unstable due to her gambling debts. They claimed she never intended to kill anyone. She merely wanted to scare Sunny into giving back her clothes and passport so she could flee the country, and that the teenagers had escalated the situation on their own out of panic. But however, the jury didn't buy into the defense story. The evidence of premeditation was simply too overwhelming, because you do not just buy heavy-duty execution tools and recruit armed teenagers for a simple scare tactic. And so on May 8, 1998, Jeena Han was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. The judge, in this case, didn't show leniency. He sentenced her to 26 years to life in the state prison. Now, for most true crime stories, this is where the tale ends. The villain goes to prison for life and the victim moves on and justice is served. But the story of the Han twins has one final, deeply psychological twist that leaves experts scratching their heads. Because as the years turn into decades, Jeena Han sat inside the California Institution for Women. Out there, she wasn't a problematic inmate. In fact, she was exemplary. She even took college courses, underwent extensive psychological therapy, and maintained a flawless behavioral record. Over time, her anger had faded, replaced by deep documented remorse for what she had done to her sister. While out on the real world, Sunny Han was fighting her own quiet battles. Surviving a murder plot by your own identical twin leaves profound, unimaginable psychological scars. And every time Sunny looked in the mirror, she saw the face of the woman who tried to have her killed. Sunny struggled with severe trauma, anxiety, and the weight of the endless media spotlight. But eventually, as time had passed, something truly miraculous had happened within Sunny's heart. Her terror and hatred transformed into grief for her broken family, and eventually into a profound sense of forgiveness. Finally, in 2017, after serving nearly 2 decades, Jeena Han became eligible for parole. During the 10th parole board hearings, a letter was submitted to the board that stunned everyone in the room. It was actually a letter from the victim herself, Sunny Han. Now, Sunny had wrote to the board stating that she had completely forgiven her twin sister. She argued that Gina had served enough time and that she was no longer a threat to her or to society, and she also actively pleaded with the state of California to release her sister. It was a stunning display of grace that shocked the legal community and the prosecutors who had fought so hard to keep Gina locked up. And despite fierce opposition from the Orange County District Attorney's Office, who argued that Gina remained a highly manipulative narcissist who was just playing a part to get out, the parole board immediately sided with the sisters. And on May 2018, after serving nearly 20 years behind bars, Jeena Han walked out of the prison gates a free woman. And so today, both twins live completely private lives, entirely away from the flashing cameras, the media requests, and the true crime headlines. It is closely guarded and unknown whether they have ever reunited in person to look at each other's faces again, or if they simply shared a quiet, distant peace across miles. The story of Jeena and Sunny Han remains one of the most chilling, psychologically complex studies of sibling rivalry and identity in criminal history. It serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the darkest monsters aren't just strangers hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they carry your exact same face. And that brings us to the end of this episode. So what do you guys think? Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive a person who has plotted to take your own life? Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most bizarre and psychological cases. I will see you on the next video. Until then, bye bye and take care.